He walked into the courtroom wearing a faded oversized hoodie and torn jeans, looking like every stereotype Judge Harlan Whitaker had come to despise. The courtroom snickered. The bailiff reached for his handcuffs. Judge Whitaker, a man who had ruined thousands of lives from his high bench, saw nothing but another thug to be crushed. He mocked the boy's clothes. He mocked his hair. He mocked his very existence. But the judge made one fatal mistake. He judged the book by its cover. He did not know that the boy standing before him was not a defendant. He was the youngest, most lethal Ivy League prosecutor in state history, and he was not there to plead guilty. He was there to put the judge in handcuffs. This is the story of how arrogance met its match and the brutal karma that followed. You do not want to miss the ending. The air in courtroom 4B did not smell like justice. It smelled like floor wax, old wood, and the stale, cold sweat of fear. To the regulars at the Cook County Criminal Courthouse, 4B had a different name. They called it the Slaughterhouse, and the butcher in charge was the Honorable Harlan Whitaker. Judge Whitaker was a man carved from granite and prejudice. At 64 years old, he had a face that looked as if it had been eroded by a river of bitterness. He sat high upon his mahogany bench, his silver hair slicked back with severe precision. His eyes, pale and watery blue, scanned the room like a hawk looking for a field mouse to break. He did not just preside over cases, he dismantled people. He did not interpret the law, he weaponized it. A 19-year-old boy named Desmond Ellis stood behind the defense table, trembling so hard the fabric of his cheap, ill-fitting suit rippled. He was charged with resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, charges that everyone in the room knew were code for walking while black in the wrong neighborhood. "Mr. Ellis!" Judge Whitaker's voice boomed, bypassing the microphone. He did not need amplification. His disdain was loud enough. "Your public defender seems to think that your bright future and your grandmother's tears are legal tender in my courtroom. They are not." Desmond's public defender, a terrifyingly overworked man named Mr. Quentin Barlow, who smelled of instant coffee and defeat, tried to stand up. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not, Mr. Barlow," Whitaker snapped, cutting him down with a wave of his hand. The gold signet ring on Whitaker's finger caught the fluorescent light. "I have read the report. Officer Vance Novak states clearly that the defendant displayed aggression, that he postured in a threatening manner." "I was just reaching for my ID, sir," Desmond whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I swear." Whitaker slammed his gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "Silence!" he roared. He leaned forward, his black robe bunching around his shoulders like the wings of a vulture. "I am sick and tired of this parade of excuses. You people always have an excuse. It is the system. It is the police. It is poverty. You know what I see, Mr. Ellis? I see a lack of discipline. I see a culture of disrespect rotting the core of this city." The court stenographer, a woman named Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, who had worked there for 30 years, flinched. She had heard Whitaker say, "you people," 1,000 times. It never got easier to type. "I am inclined," Whitaker said, a cruel smile touching his thin lips, "to make an example of you. Maximum sentencing, 6 months in county, followed by 3 years of probation. Maybe a little time in a cage will teach you how to behave in civilized society." Desmond's knees gave out. He slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. From the gallery, the sound of his grandmother sobbing broke the heavy silence. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. Whitaker looked at the grandmother with cold indifference. "Bailiff, if that woman cannot control her theatrics, remove her." "Yes, Your Honor." The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Deputy Curtis Lawson, grunted. Whitaker picked up his pen to sign the order that would ruin Desmond's life, unless there was any other disruption. That was when the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. It was not a respectful opening. It was slow, deliberate, and loud. Every head turned. The figure standing in the doorway was the antithesis of everything courtroom 4B represented. He was young, black, and dressed in a way that made the wealthy lawyers in the front row clutch their briefcases a little tighter. He wore a charcoal gray, oversized hoodie with the hood pulled up, casting a shadow over his eyes. His jeans were distressed, ripped at the knees, and on his feet were a pair of pristine limited edition high-top sneakers. He did not walk, he strolled. He moved with a loose, rhythmic gait, walking right down the center aisle, ignoring the no standing signs, ignoring the gasps from the gallery. He carried nothing. No briefcase, no notepad, just his hands in his hoodie pockets. Judge Whitaker froze, his pen hovering over the paper. His face turned a shade of crimson that usually preceded an explosion. "Stop right there," Whitaker barked. The young man did not stop. He kept walking until he was past the bar, standing right in the well of the court, directly between the prosecutor and the defense tables. He looked around the room, chewing gum with a slow, deliberate motion. "I said halt!" Whitaker shouted, standing up. "Deputy Lawson, seize this intruder." Deputy Lawson lumbered forward, his hand resting on his taser. "All right, kid. You took a wrong turn. Let us go." The young man finally stopped. He slowly took his hands out of his pockets. He did not raise them in surrender. He just crossed his arms. He looked up at the judge, pushing his hood back to reveal a handsome face, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that burned with a terrifyingly calm intelligence. He looked to be about 22. "I did not take a wrong turn," the young man said. His voice was deep, smooth, and projected perfectly to the back of the room without shouting. "I am exactly where I need to be." Courtroom 4B, presided over by Judge Harlan Whitaker, although presided seems like a generous word for what I just watched happen. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Nobody spoke to Whitaker like that. Not the mayor, not the governor, certainly not a kid in a hoodie. Whitaker looked like he was having a stroke. "You insolent little thug! Do you have any idea where you are?" Cook County Circuit Court, built in 1929, neoclassical architecture, smells like mildew and civil rights violations. A few people in the back gasped. Desmond Ellis looked up from the defense table, his eyes wide. "I will hold you in contempt," Whitaker screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I will bury you under the jail. Who do you think you are? Walking into my courtroom, looking like a street rat, chewing gum, and addressing the bench without permission." "I am just an observer, Your Honor," the young man said, emphasizing the title with heavy sarcasm. "I heard you were about to sentence Mr. Ellis here. I just wanted to see if the rumors were true." "Rumors?" Whitaker narrowed his eyes. "That you do not practice law," the young man said, taking a step closer to the bench. "That you practice bullying. That you target young men who look like me, and you feed them into the prison industrial complex to keep your conviction rates high." "Deputy Lawson, arrest him now!" Whitaker shrieked. "Get this trash out of my sight!" Deputy Lawson lunged for the young man's arm. "Do not touch me," the young man said. He did not shout, but the command was so authoritative, so filled with icy steel, that Deputy Lawson, a man who had tackled fleeing felons, actually hesitated. "You are disrupting a legal proceeding," Lawson stammered. "I am the legal proceeding," the young man said. Whitaker laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. You are nothing. You are a statistic waiting to happen. Look at you. You cannot even dress yourself properly. You probably cannot even spell jurisprudence, let alone understand it. You think because you watch television, you can come in here and speechify? This is the real world, boy. And in the real world, people like you listen to people like me." The young man smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the prey step into a trap. "People like me?" he asked softly. "And what kind of people is that?" Using the judge's first name sent a shockwave through the room. "Criminals," Whitaker spat. "Derelicts. Uneducated drains on society." "Uneducated," the young man repeated. He reached into the inner pocket of his hoodie. "Gun!" Lawson shouted, drawing his taser. "Relax, deputy," the young man said calmly. He pulled out not a weapon, but a lanyard. He did not put it on. He just held it up. It dangled from his fingers, spinning slowly. "I assure you, my education is quite sufficient." Judge Whitaker squinted at the object in the young man's hand. It was an ID card, encased in hard plastic. But it was not a driver's license. It was a bar association card, and behind it, a gold badge. "Let us test that theory about spelling," the young man said, his voice hardening. "Jurisprudence. Jurisprudence. Derived from the Latin jurisprudentia, meaning the science of law. A science you seem to have forgotten, Judge." The young man unzipped his hoodie. Underneath the street clothes, he was not wearing a t-shirt. He was wearing a bespoke three-piece navy suit that probably cost more than Deputy Lawson's car. The knot of his silk tie was a perfect Windsor. He shrugged the hoodie off his shoulders, letting it drop to the floor, revealing the sharp, tailored lines of a high-powered attorney. He pinned the badge to his lapel. "My name," he announced, his voice booming with authority, "is Jace Bowman, Senior Counsel for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and I am arguably the only person in this room who actually knows the law." The air left the room. Jace Bowman. The name was legendary in legal circles, though few had seen his face because he usually worked federal cases in Washington. He was a prodigy, graduated Harvard Law at 19, top of his class. He had never lost a case. He was known as the Scalpel because he did not just beat his opponents, he dissected them. Judge Whitaker sank back into his chair. His face went from red to a pasty gray. "Mr. Bowman," Whitaker stammered, "I was not informed of any federal observation today." "That is the point of an observation, Harlan," Jay said, dropping the formalities completely. He walked over to the defense table and placed a hand on Desmond Ellis's shoulder. "If you know we are watching, you behave. We wanted to see how you act when you think no one who matters is looking." Jace turned to the court reporter. "Mrs. Hayes, please ensure the record reflects that Judge Whitaker referred to me as trash, a street rat, and a statistic based solely on my attire and race before identifying me." Mrs. Hayes, who was secretly smiling, nodded vigorously. "It is on the record, Mr. Bowman." "This is entrapment," Whitaker blustered, trying to regain his composure. "You came in here in a costume. You provoked me." "I wore clothes," Jace corrected. "Clothes that millions of Americans wear every day. If seeing a hoodie makes you unable to administer impartial justice, then you are not fit to sit on that bench. But that is not why I am here. I am not here for your manners, Judge. I am here for your docket." Jace walked over to the prosecutor, a man named Mr. Bryce Caldwell, who was currently trying to make himself invisible. "Mr. Caldwell, is it?" Jace asked. Yes," Caldwell squeaked. "Hand me the file on Desmond Ellis." Caldwell did not hesitate. He handed over the folder like it was burning his hands. Jace flipped through it, his eyes scanning the pages at lightning speed. "Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, Officer Vance Novak." Jace chuckled humorlessly. "Judge, did you read the supplementary evidence report?" The case was clear," Whitaker said defensively. "Did you read it?" Jace barked. The sheer volume of his voice made the judge flinch. "No," Whitaker admitted. "If you had," Jace said, holding up a piece of paper, "you would have seen that there is body camera footage listed here. Footage that Mr. Caldwell curiously forgot to enter into evidence, and footage that you, Judge, did not ask for because you were too busy rushing this kid to jail." Jace pulled a USB drive from his pocket. "I, however, did my homework. I subpoenaed the footage this morning. Shall we watch it?" "Mr. Bowman, this is highly irregular," Whitaker began. "Play the video," Jace commanded, pointing to the large screen on the wall. He looked at the bailiff. "Deputy, if you please." Deputy Lawson, realizing the power dynamic had shifted violently, hurried to plug in the drive. The screen flickered to life. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. The video showed Desmond standing on a sidewalk, waiting for a bus. Officer Vance Novak approached him. There was no aggression from Desmond. Novak shoved him. Desmond raised his hands. Novak shoved him again, then tackled him. "Stop resisting," the officer in the video screamed, while Desmond lay perfectly still on the ground. "I am not doing anything," Desmond cried out in the video. The video ended. Jace turned back to the bench. The courtroom was dead silent. "That," Jace said, pointing to the screen, is not resisting arrest. That is assault by a police officer. An officer, I might add, who appears frequently in your courtroom, Judge Whitaker. An officer whose testimony you treat as gospel. Jace leaned his hands on the prosecution table and stared daggers at the judge. But this is not just about Desmond Ellis, is it, Harlan? Judge Whitaker was sweating now, profusely. I was misled by the prosecution. I will dismiss the charges immediately. Mr. Ellis is free to go. Oh no, Jace smiled. We are not done. Dismissing the charges is the easy part. You see, when I looked into your sentencing history, I found a pattern. You sent an unusually high number of young men to a specific private detention center, Glendale Corrections. Whitaker's eyes went wide. Genuine terror filled them for the first time. Do not, he whispered. Mr. Bowman, can we speak in my chambers? We will speak right here, Jace roared, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. In the real world, you love so much. Jace turned to the gallery. Does anyone know who owns the land that Glendale Corrections sits on? He pulled another document from his folder, a shell company called Apex Holdings. And does anyone know who the majority shareholder of Apex Holdings is? Jace held up a deed. It is a trust, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. In the name of Harlan Whitaker. The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the back row were frantically typing on their phones. The gallery was gasping. That is a lie, Whitaker screamed, standing up and knocking over his water pitcher. That is a fabrication. It is a certified bank record from the Cayman Islands obtained via federal warrant, Jace said calmly. You are sending kids to jail to fill beds in a prison you profit from. That is racketeering. That is fraud. And that is a deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Jace turned to the back of the room. Agent Morales, the doors opened again. This time, 6 men in FBI windbreakers walked in. Harlan Whitaker, Jace said, checking his watch. You are under arrest. The silence that had fallen over courtroom 4B during Bowman's revelation shattered into a cacophony of chaos the moment Agent Morales laid a hand on Judge Whitaker's shoulder. It was a sound rarely heard in a hall of justice. The sound of absolute unchecked bedlam. Get your hands off me! Whitaker shrieked, his voice cracking into a pathetic falsetto. He tried to recoil, his chair scraping violently against the dais, but there was nowhere to go. The high bench, which for decades had been his fortress, was now a trap. Agent Morales, a man whose expression was as unyielding as a granite cliff, did not even blink. Harlan Whitaker, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The Miranda rights, words Whitaker had heard mumbled thousands of times by bored police officers, suddenly sounded like a death knell when directed at him. Deputy Lawson, the bailiff, who just moments ago had been ready to tase Jace, stood frozen, his mouth agape. His loyalties were short-circuiting. The man he feared and served was being taken down by a higher power. Lawson, do something, Whitaker pleaded, his eyes wild and terrified. They cannot do this. It is a coup. Lawson looked at the FBI agents, then at the federal badge gleaming on Jace's lapel, and slowly took a step back. It is out of my jurisdiction, Judge, he mumbled, looking at the floor. The betrayal hit Whitaker harder than the handcuffs that were now being ratcheted onto his wrists. The metallic click, click, click echoed through the room. A sound so final, it made the breath catch in Desmond Ellis's throat. Whitaker was hauled to his feet. The FBI agents did not treat him with the deferential delicacy usually reserved for white-collar criminals. They handled him with the same rough efficiency Whitaker's own deputies used on teenage defendants. Wait! Jace's voice cut through the noise. The procession stopped. Jace walked up to the bench. He was eye-level with Whitaker now. The judge looked tiny, shrunken, his expensive robe bunched up awkwardly around the handcuffs. You forgot something, Jace said softly. Jace reached out and grabbed the collar of Whitaker's black robe. With a sharp, decisive tug, he stripped it off the judge's shoulders. Underneath, Whitaker was just an old man in a rumpled shirt, sweat staining the armpits. Without the robe, he was not the voice of God anymore. He was just Harlan. Jace tossed the robe onto the defense table, the same table where thousands of lives had been ruined. You do not deserve to wear that. It is supposed to represent impartiality. You used it as a shroud to cover your crimes. The walk of shame out of the courtroom was agonizingly slow. The gallery, previously terrified into silence by Whitaker's tyranny, began to murmur. Then, someone in the back, a mother whose son Whitaker had sent away for 10 years on her first offense, started slow clapping. Others joined in. It was not a joyful applause. It was a dark, heavy rhythm of retribution. As they passed the defense table, Whitaker locked eyes with Desmond Ellis. For the first time in his life, the judge looked at a young black defendant and did not see prey. He saw his own destruction. Desmond, still stunned, his cheeks wet with tears of relief, just shook his head slowly. He did not feel triumphant. He just felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. Jace stayed behind as the FBI dragged Whitaker out the side door. He walked over to Desmond and his grandmother. The grandmother threw her arms around Jace, sobbing into his expensive suit, thanking God and thanking him in the same breath. "Do not thank me yet, Mom," Jace said gently, extricating himself. "The easy part is over. Now we have to make it stick. The system protects its own, even the rotten ones. This is going to be a war." Jace turned to the stunned prosecutor, Mr. Bryce Caldwell, who was trying to sneak out the back. "Caldwell," Jace barked. The prosecutor froze. "You are a witness now. If I find out you buried one more piece of exculpatory evidence in any case in this courthouse, you will be sharing a cell with Harlan. Do we understand each other?" Caldwell nodded furiously, looking like he might faint. Jace pulled out his phone. It was already blowing up with calls from Washington. The Attorney General wanted a briefing. The press was already assembling on the courthouse steps. The story of the hobo hero attorney taking down the butcher judge was too good to resist. Jace looked around the empty bench, the discarded robe, the stunned court reporter. He took a deep breath. The slaughterhouse was closed for the day, but the cleanup had just begun. The trial of the United States of America versus Harlan Whitaker did not take place in Cook County. It was deemed impossible to find an impartial jury in a city where Whitaker had reigned with such terror. The venue was changed to a federal courthouse 200 miles away, a gleaming structure of glass and steel that felt antiseptic compared to the dark wood of courtroom 4B. Whitaker, out on an astronomical bail that wiped out half his liquid assets, looked tragically diminished. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a perpetual stoop. His silver hair, once impeccably slicked, was thinner and prone to disarray. He wore expensive suits, but they seemed to hang off him now. The presiding judge was the Honorable Valeria Reyes, a formidable legal mind known for her absolute adherence to procedure and her complete lack of patience for theatrics. But the real star of the show was the special prosecutor, Jace Bowman. When Jace walked into the courtroom on the first day, the gallery buzzed. He wore a suit tailored so sharply it seemed to cut the air around him. He carried himself not just with confidence, but with a righteous fury that was barely contained beneath a veneer of professional calm. The weeks of the trial were a slow, methodical dissection of Whitaker's life. Jace did not just present evidence. He wove a tapestry of corruption that was breathtaking in its scope. He called forensic accountants who traced the complex web of shell companies leading from the Cayman Islands back to Whitaker's personal trust. He showed the jury spreadsheets detailing the occupancy bonuses Whitaker received from Apex Holdings every time Glendale Corrections hit capacity, bonuses paid right before Christmas, year after year. But the most damaging testimony did not come from bankers. It came from the victims. Jace called a dozen young men to the stand, now in their 20s, whose lives had been derailed by Whitaker's court. They spoke of minor infractions, truancy, petty shoplifting, that Whitaker had twisted into felony convictions, carrying maximum sentences at Glendale. They spoke of the abuse inside the private facility, the lack of schooling, the gang violence that the guards, paid by the same company paying Whitaker, ignored. Whitaker sat at the defense table, refusing to look at them. He scribbled furiously on a notepad, his jaw tight. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The defense, desperate and arrogant to the end, made a fatal error. They put Whitaker on the stand. They thought his years of experience would allow him to outmaneuver the young prosecutor. They were wrong. Jace approached the witness stand like a panther stalking a wounded animal. He started slow, lulling Whitaker into a false sense of security with questions about legal procedures and judicial philosophy. Then, the trap sprang. "Mr. Whitaker," Jace said, leaning against the jury box, "you stated earlier that your harsh sentencing was designed as a deterrent to combat a culture of disrespect, correct?" "That is correct," Whitaker said, his old haughtiness flaring up. "Some demographics need a firmer hand to understand the rule of law." A ripple went through the jury. "Demographics?" Jace repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. "Let us talk about that. I have here the transcripts from your court over the last several years." Jace motioned to a stack of boxes 3 feet high next to his table. "I ran a statistical analysis." Jace picked up a single sheet of paper. "In cases where the defendant was white and charged with first-time drug possession, you granted probation 92% of the time. In cases where the defendant was black and charged with the exact same crime, you sentenced them to Glendale Corrections 88% of the time. Can you explain that statistical anomaly to the jury?" Whitaker sputtered. "Each case is unique. You cannot reduce justice to a spreadsheet." "I am not reducing justice," Jace shot back, his voice rising. "I am exposing bias. Let us look at the money. Every single one of those black defendants you sent to Glendale represented a $5,000 bonus for you. The white defendants you gave probation to, 0. It seems, Mr. Whitaker, your firm hand was guided less by the law and more by your wallet." "Objection! Argumentative!" Whitaker's high-priced lawyer yelled. "Overruled," Judge Reyes said coldly. "The witness will answer." "It was business," Whitaker yelled, losing his composure completely. "It was an investment. I did not force them to commit crimes." "No," Jace said, walking right up to the witness box, his eyes burning into Whitaker's. "You just made sure that when they made a mistake, it was fatal. You did not see human beings from that bench, Harlan. You saw inventory. You saw livestock to be shipped to the pen you owned. You monetized human suffering. You are not a judge. You are a slave trader in a robe." The courtroom gasped. Whitaker looked like he had been slapped. "I am a respected jurist," he shouted, tears of rage in his eyes. "I have served this county for 30 years. You are a child in a costume trying to destroy your betters." Jace smiled a terrifying, icy look. "I guess we will see who the jury thinks is better." No further questions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. It would have been faster, but they took an hour for lunch. When the verdict was read, guilty on all 47 counts, including racketeering, wire fraud, tax evasion, and deprivation of rights under color of law, Whitaker did not react. He just stared straight ahead, a hollow shell of a man. But the real drama was saved for the sentencing hearing a week later. The federal courtroom was packed. Desmond Ellis was there, sitting in the front row, now enrolled in community college and working part-time. He looked healthy. The haunted look was gone from his eyes. Jace Bowman sat at the prosecution table, silent and still. He had done his job. Now it was time for karma to do hers. Judge Valeria Reyes looked down at Whitaker over her reading glasses. The silence in the room was heavy, expectant. "Harlan Whitaker," she began, her voice calm but rigid with disapproval. "The crimes you have committed strike at the very foundation of our democracy. The judiciary relies entirely on the public trust. Without that trust, the rule of law is just words on paper. You did not just break the law, you poisoned the well for everyone else." Whitaker stood, leaning heavily on the table. His lawyers had instructed him to show remorse. "Your Honor," he mumbled, his voice shaking. "I made mistakes in judgment. I got lost. I asked for leniency. I am an old man. Prison will kill me." Judge Reyes listened, her expression unchanging. When he was finished, she shuffled her papers. "You ask for mercy," Judge Reyes said. a mercy you rarely showed to others. You speak of being an old man, yet you stole the youth of hundreds of young men without a second thought. You treated your courtroom like a personal piggy bank, trading years of human life for profit. She leaned forward. There is an old legal maxim, Mr. Whitaker. He who comes into equity must come with clean hands. Your hands are filthy. The judge took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the blow. I have reviewed the federal sentencing guidelines. Given the severity of your crimes, the abuse of public trust, and the sheer scale of the victimization, I am sentencing you to the maximum allowable penalty. Whitaker's knees buckled slightly. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 20 years. Whitaker let out a pathetic whimper. That was effectively a life sentence. Furthermore, Judge Reyes continued, a steely glint in her eye, while the Bureau of Prisons has final say on placement, it is the strong recommendation of this court, and I have received assurances from the Bureau that this recommendation will be followed, that due to overcrowding in minimum security facilities, you be placed in a medium security contract facility. She paused for effect. You will serve your time at Glendale Corrections. The room erupted. It was the ultimate poetic justice. The architect of the slaughterhouse was being sent to live inside his own creation. Whitaker looked up, his face a mask of abject terror. No, he whispered. Please, not there. They are animals in there. They will kill me. They are human beings, Mr. Whitaker, Judge Reyes said, her voice like ice. Many of whom you place there. Perhaps you can use your time to teach them about that civilized society you were so fond of lecturing about. The marshal will take the defendant into custody. The gavel banged. It sounded like the closing of a heavy iron door. As the marshals grabbed Whitaker's arms to lead him away, he was not the stoic figure of authority anymore. He was sobbing, begging, his dignity completely gone, dragged out of the courtroom, past the people whose lives he had tried to destroy. The karma was not just hard, it was absolute. The transition from absolute power to absolute helplessness is a terrifying journey. And for former Judge Harlan Whitaker, it was a daily reality. Inside Glendale Corrections, life was a grinding, brutal routine. Whitaker, now inmate number 8942, was no longer the honorable. He was prey. The prison hierarchy did not care about his law degree or his Cayman Island accounts. In here, currency was respect, and Whitaker had none. He had spent his career stripping men of their dignity. Now, the environment he helped curate was stripping him of his sanity. He was housed in Sector 4, the high-volume wing he had personally advocated for expansion during a grotesque ribbon-cutting ceremony years prior. The irony was suffocating. The air was thick, with the smell of industrial cleaner and unwashed bodies, a scent he had once turned his nose up at from the safety of his bench. Now, he breathed it 24 hours a day. His cellmate was a man named Big Ray, a hulking figure serving a 10-year sentence for a robbery that Whitaker himself had presided over. Big Ray did not physically harm Whitaker. That would be too easy. Instead, he engaged in psychological warfare. He would recount in excruciating detail the day Whitaker sentenced him. He remembered every sneer, every dismissive wave of the hand. You said I was a menace to society, Big Ray would whisper from the top bunk at night. You said I needed to be removed. Well, look at us now, Harlan. We are neighbors. Whitaker stopped sleeping. His hands, once steady enough to sign life-altering warrants, now shook uncontrollably. He lost weight rapidly, his expensive suits replaced by the scratchy, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that chafed his skin. He spent his recreation hour huddling near the fence, staring at the sky, terrified to make eye contact with anyone. Every time a guard walked by, guards employed by Apex Holdings, the company he secretly owned shares in, he flinched. They knew who he was. They knew he was the reason their facility was overcrowded and understaffed. There was no sympathy to be found. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the world was healing. The Cook County Criminal Courthouse was undergoing a spiritual renovation. The physical building remained the same, the imposing stone pillars, the echoing hallways, but the atmosphere had shifted. The shadow of fear that Whitaker had cast for decades was dissipating, replaced by a cautious optimism. Courtroom 4B, once the slaughterhouse, was now under the jurisdiction of Judge Carla Mendoza, a woman known for her fairness and her commitment to restorative justice. She did not view defendants as statistics. She saw them as people. The conviction rates for minor offenses plummeted. The pipeline to prison that Whitaker had engineered was being dismantled, pipe by rusty pipe. Jace had stayed in Chicago longer than he intended. The Whitaker case had opened a Pandora's box of corruption that extended far beyond one judge. He spent his days in a temporary office at the federal building, sifting through mountains of evidence, building cases against the network of enablers who had allowed Whitaker to operate, the corrupt clerks who lost files, the police officers who falsified reports, the private prison lobbyists who wrote checks. But his most important work was not legal. It was personal. He had taken a special interest in Desmond Ellis. The young man, who had been the catalyst for Whitaker's downfall, was struggling to find his footing. The trauma of the arrest, the fear of imprisonment, and the sudden thrust into the spotlight had left deep scars. Desmond had dropped out of his community college classes, overwhelmed by anxiety. Jace found him one Tuesday afternoon, sitting on a park bench, staring at the ducks in the pond, a law textbook closed on his lap. "Studying hard or hardly studying?" Jace asked, sitting down next to him. He was dressed casually today, jeans and a sweater, trying to bridge the gap between federal prosecutor and mentor. Desmond jumped, then relaxed when he saw who it was. "Mr. Bowman, I did not see you there. Call me Jace, Desmond. We have been through too much for titles." Jace looked at the closed book. Constitutional law. Heavy reading for a Tuesday. "I am trying," Desmond sighed, running a hand over his face. "But every time I open it, I hear his voice. Whitaker telling me I am nothing, telling me I am a thug. It is like he is still in my head, man." Jace nodded slowly. "That is how bullies work. They plant seeds of doubt so deep that even after they are gone, the weeds keep growing. But you know the best way to kill weeds, Desmond?" Desmond looked at him. "Roundup." Jace laughed. "Overgrowth. You plant so many good things, knowledge, success, confidence, that the weeds get choked out. You do not fight the darkness. You just turn on the light." "I do not know if I have enough light," Desmond admitted, his voice quiet. "I look at you, and you are invincible. You walked into that courtroom like you own the place. I was shaking so hard, I thought I was going to pass out." "Let me tell you a secret," Jace said, leaning in. "When I was your age, I was terrified too. I grew up in a neighborhood not too different from yours. I had cops stop me for walking down the street. I had teachers tell me I was not college material. I shook every time I had to speak up. But I realized something. Fear is just fuel. You can let it burn you down, or you can use it to power your engine." He tapped the law book. "This book, this is your engine. Whitaker did not want you to read this. He wanted you to think the law was magic, something only he could wield. But it is not magic. It is a tool, and right now, it is sitting on your lap, waiting for you to pick it up." Desmond looked down at the book. He traced the gold lettering on the cover. He said, "I was a statistic." "You are?" Jace said firmly. "You are a statistic of survival. You are the one who got away. And because you got away, you have a responsibility. There are 1,000 other Desmonds out there who did not get a federal prosecutor walking through the door at the last second. Who is going to fight for them?" Desmond looked up, his eyes meeting Jace's. For the first time in months, the fear was replaced by a spark, a small tentative flame of purpose. "Me?" Desmond asked. "Why not you?" Jace challenged. "You know the system from the inside. You know what it feels like to be powerless. That makes you dangerous to men like Whitaker. A lawyer with empathy is the scariest thing in the world to a corrupt system." Desmond opened the book. He did not read it immediately, but he held it open. "I have a midterm on Thursday. I was going to skip it." "Do not," Jace said, standing up. "Go take it. Ace it. And when you do, text me. I am buying dinner." The weeks turned into months. The season shifted from the crisp orange of autumn to the biting gray of a Chicago winter. Jace continued his cleanup. He secured indictments against 3 more officers from Whitaker's precinct. He forced the resignation of the chief of police. He even managed to get a federal oversight committee appointed to review every single sentence handed down by Whitaker in the last several years. Hundreds of cases were being reopened. Men who had been rotting in prison for years were coming home. Families were being reunited, but the centerpiece of the restoration was the Whitaker Trust Fund. In a stroke of legal genius, Jace had argued that since Whitaker's assets were the proceeds of criminal enterprise, the racketeering charges, they should be forfeited not to the government, but to a restitution fund for his victims. The Cayman Island accounts were drained. The luxury cars were auctioned. The sprawling estate in the suburbs was sold. Every dollar went into a fund to pay for legal appeals, education, and job training. For the young men Whitaker had wrongfully incarcerated, it was the ultimate karma. Whitaker's greed was now financing the very futures he had tried to destroy. One particularly snowy evening, Jace received a text. It was a picture, a blurry photo of a paper posted on a bulletin board. Introduction to Criminal Law, midterm grade, 94%. Underneath, a message from Desmond. Dinner is on you. Jace smiled, sitting alone in his office. He typed back, pick the place, make it expensive. Whitaker is paying. Meanwhile, at Glendale Corrections, Harlan Whitaker was learning a new kind of law, the law of consequences. He had been moved to the library detail, a job usually reserved for trusted inmates, but in his case, it was a punishment. He had to sort and shelve the very law books he had once memorized. Other inmates would come in looking for help with their appeals. One afternoon, a young man no older than 20 approached the desk. He was holding a tattered form. Hey, old man, the kid said. You know how to fill this out? It is a writ of habeas corpus. Whitaker looked up. The kid had the same desperate eyes Desmond Ellis had that day in court. I used to know, Whitaker rasped. His voice was rusty from disuse. Well, help me out, the kid said, sliding the paper across the desk. I did not do it. The judge said I did, but he was lying. Whitaker looked at the paper. He saw the name of the sentencing judge, Honorable Harlan Whitaker. It was one of his own cases from years ago. He remembered the boy. He had given him 5 years for possession of a stolen bicycle, a bicycle the boy claimed he had bought from a friend. Whitaker had not cared then. He needed the bed filled. Whitaker's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He looked at the boy, really looked at him, and saw the human being beneath the jumpsuit. You need to cite the Fourth Amendment violation here, Whitaker said, his voice shaking. And the lack of probable cause. Yeah? The kid asked, hopeful. Yeah, Whitaker whispered. He began to write. For the first time in decades, Harlan Whitaker was using his knowledge of the law to help someone, not hurt them. It would not undo the past. It would not shorten his sentence. But as he wrote, the crushing weight on his chest lightened just a fraction. The auditorium at the University of Chicago Law School was packed. Parents, friends, and faculty filled the seats, fanning themselves with programs. The air buzzed with the excitement of graduation. On the stage, the dean approached the podium. And now, the dean announced, it is my distinct honor to introduce our valedictorian, a young man whose journey to this stage has been nothing short of extraordinary. He is a recipient of the Jace Bowman Civil Rights Scholarship and the future clerking associate for Supreme Court Justice Elena Marquez. Please welcome Desmond Ellis. The applause was thunderous. Desmond Ellis walked across the stage. He wore the traditional doctoral robes, but underneath, everyone knew he was made of steel. He looked older, wiser, his face etched with the determination of a man who had walked through fire. He stepped up to the microphone. He looked out into the crowd. In the front row, sitting next to Desmond's beaming grandmother, was Jace Bowman. Jace was older now, a few gray hairs in his beard, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He nodded at Desmond, a silent salute between soldiers. Thank you, Desmond began. his voice strong and clear. 5 years ago, I stood in a courtroom not far from here. I was in handcuffs. I was told that my life was over. I was told that I was a mistake. He paused. The room was silent. I was saved that day, Desmond continued. Not by luck, but by someone who saw me. Someone who looked past the hoodie and saw the human. Someone who taught me that the law is not a weapon for the powerful, but a shield for the powerless. Desmond looked directly at Jace. We live in a world that loves to judge, Desmond said. We judge by clothes. We judge by zip codes. We judge by skin color. But I learned a hard lesson that day. Justice is not blind. People are blind. Justice, true justice, is seeing. It is seeing the potential in a kid from the South Side. It is seeing the corruption in a high office. It is seeing that we are all connected. I am not standing here today because I am special, Desmond said, his voice rising. I am standing here because I refuse to be what they said I was. I am not a statistic. I am not a thug. I am a lawyer. The crowd erupted. His grandmother was on her feet, tears streaming down her face, shouting, "Hallelujah!" And to those who think they can use the law to oppress, Desmond said, his voice turning steely, channeling the very man who had saved him. To those who think they can hide behind robes and badges, we are watching, we are learning, and we are coming for you. He raised his diploma in the air. Class of 2031, let us go to work. Caps flew into the air. The celebration was chaotic and joyful. Jace made his way through the crowd to find Desmond. They embraced, a hug that carried the weight of years of struggle and victory. You did good, kid, Jace said, his voice thick with emotion. I had a good teacher, Desmond smiled. So what is next? You heading back to DC? Actually, Jace said, adjusting his tie, I am thinking of sticking around. There is an opening for a federal judge in the Northern District. Someone needs to fill the seat. Desmond's eyes went wide. You, a judge? Why not? Jace grinned. I think it is time we put someone on the bench who knows what it is like to stand on the other side of it. Desmond laughed. Judge Bowman has a nice ring to it. And I will need a good clerk, Jace said, raising an eyebrow. Someone smart, someone who knows constitutional law, someone who got a 94 on their midterm. Desmond's smile faltered for a second, then returned brighter than before. I think I might know a guy. Good, Jace said, because the work never ends. Whitaker was just one man. There are plenty more out there, but today, Jace looked around at the graduates, at the families, at the hope radiating from every corner of the room. Today, we celebrate. Today, the good guys won. As they walked out of the auditorium together, the sun was setting over Chicago, casting long golden shadows across the campus. The slaughterhouse was a distant memory, a ghost story to tell law students. The reality was here, walking side by side, the mentor and the student, the present and the future of justice. And somewhere deep in the bowels of a prison he built, Harlan Whitaker sat on his bunk, listening to the faint sounds of the world moving on without him. He picked up a law book, his only companion, and began to read, finally understanding the words he had twisted for so long. The karma was complete, the circle was closed, and the story of the judge and the genius in disguise had become something more than a viral moment. It had become a legacy. Wow. Just wow. The journey of Desmond Ellis, from a terrified defendant to a valedictorian, and the poetic justice of Harlan Whitaker, finding his own humanity only after losing his freedom. It is the kind of ending that hits you right in the soul. This story was not just about a courtroom takedown. It was about redemption, the power of mentorship, and the undeniable truth that while the wheels of justice grind slow, they grind exceedingly fine. If this finale gave you chills, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button until it breaks. It helps the channel so much. Share this video with your friends, your family, or anyone who needs a reminder that it is never too late to turn your life around. And if you have not already, subscribe and hit the bell icon. We have more incredible stories of justice, karma, and human resilience coming your way, and you do not want to miss them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, be the light that chokes out the weeds. See you in the next one.